Good afternoon, everybody. You've got three experienced minors counsel up here, Virginia Christ, Lauren Londes, and I'm Carol Adams. We're going to be talking to you this afternoon about a child is not just a child. Representing the child from the perspective of their culture, history, and developmental stages is really, really important. And something that we've learned with experience and something we're still working on today. That's what we're going to talk about today. I've done some research, but what we plan to do today is kind of break this up a little bit. Lauren has kids of all different ages, so we're going to let her talk about that, as well as other things here. We have experience with kids who have parents of different religions, different ethnicities, different morals, values, and beliefs, and those are the kind of things we need to consider today. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start today talking?
You start.
Okay. I took some notes this morning, and I did some research, and I do want to get some of these to you as handouts. One of the things I downloaded was Bias in the Family, Race, Ethnicity, and Culture in Custody Disputes. The other is the Equality Principle, Splitting the Difference in Custody Disputes. Another one that we'll be giving out to everyone is from the European Journal of Social Psychology, Gender Stereotypes Underlie Child Custody Decisions. So it's kind of interesting that I've gone and I've looked at what different countries think about these things, and one of the things I found is that Asian and Latino countries have always tended to look at mother as the caretaker and dad as a provider. So when somebody shows up in the United States and wants custody of their children, that doesn't go along with their past culture or even their training or even their knowledge of parenting. And how do we as minors counsel work with the child who's grown up in a certain way and now whose parents might want to change that? So those are some of the things we're going to talk about today. Another one that we'll be giving you as a handout is Blending Cultures and Religions, Effects and the Changing Makeup of Families in Our Nation Have on Child Custody Determination. And I thought that was really interesting. It goes into Native Americans as well as foreign religions. And when I say religions, it's, we need to look at people who are immigrating from Afghanistan. We need to look at, as I already mentioned, Asian and Latino families. And it was interesting when I was looking at, they brought up race in one of these. And one of the things I learned, and we talked about a little bit earlier, is Black families have sort of a stereotype where dads are often criticized for being too strict a disciplinarian. And when they got into the reasons for that, as we've seen on the news the last couple of years, that has typically been because they're afraid for their children. And they're teaching their children to be obedient and strict, don't talk back to me, this is the way it is, rather than letting a child grow up to be what they want to be. If they want to be a singer or they want to be an actor, they're being raised more by the dad to be, who might even be an authoritarian parent, because that parent is so afraid for their child's safety as they grow up. So those are some of the things we'll talk about a little bit today too. So one thing is I learned today, not today, but you'll get in these handouts, is it's not only the background of the parties, but as we've talked about earlier today, sometimes it's the background of the grandparents. I've had cases where grandparents have been really very over-involved in trying to get their children, who are the parents of maybe my minors counsel child, to get custody for a specific reason. Mm-hmm. Perhaps that grandparent might be a very strict Jewish person or a very strict Jehovah's Witness person. And I'm not picking on any religion, trust me, because that doesn't matter to me. It's what the family chooses, as long as it's in the best interest of the kids. I am not biased against a religion, but I've had cases where the parties were from Bangladesh, and there was a huge issue about the way dad treated the mother in front of the children, because in Bangladesh, the wives had no rights whatsoever. So that's one of the things, that does play into when we're trying to work with parents who have custody disputes. So it's not only their religion, it's sometimes just their beliefs, sometimes it's their values, sometimes it's their practices. I have a case right now where the dad of the parties spent his first few years of the child's life in jail. And that's all the mother knows about that dad, is what a bad guy he was. He was in jail, he was abusive, and that's what has now spilled over into the child. And the child's very afraid of the father, even though now he's a youth pastor. He got out of jail, he changed, he's a different person. So the other day I said to the mom, well, what do you know about dad now? Mm-hmm. Nothing. So, it's a big surprise to mom to find out that her beliefs from 11 years ago are sadly affecting her daughter today, and emotionally affecting her daughter today in a very negative way.
And I was going to say that actually, when we get there, it plays into the mental illness piece, because there's one of these articles talks about mental illness, I think. But more importantly, what we find is typically one parent will typically use it as a sword against the other parent, even if it's 15 years later, rather than seeing illness as the recovery period. They've recovered, they're better, and it comes back up over and over again. So you're almost starting at square one each time. Okay, we got to figure out, is that parent stable now? Have they gotten the treatment? Have they been consistent in their treatment? And what does that look like? Or is it a real problem? Did they fall off their treatment plan? Because some mental illnesses, as I'm sure some of the people in the room can better speak to, are, persistent in that they don't really ever leave. And some, they kind of become a full recovery, right? Mm-hmm. So,
and that also leads to a parent with a past drug addiction. Can they progress past that? How long ago did they progress? Are they really a different person? I had a case where the mom was actually a therapist, but never really worked at it, because she was so biased that when people went to her, and I referred people to her for a while, they'd come back to me and say, I can't go there anymore. All she does is talk bad about every dad that lives in this town. So we really have to work hard with the parents when we're minors counsel. We have to be willing to really listen to our kids, because our minors counsel kids, because we've got to be educated enough to figure out where their thought process is, to help them be in the position they happen to be in when we're appointed.
And no, that's okay. And the other thing that happens on the note that's already been discussed is you've got a parent who's got a very strong opinion about the other parent, and they have a history, but the parent has repeated it so much that the child has absorbed it to the point where they think they actually remember an incident that they couldn't even remember because they wouldn't have been old enough. And so all of that plays in. And my broad brush on the topic we're trying to talk about, I think, is that all of these aspects, the dynamic in the family about religion, the culture that a parent or a grandparent may have come from, the child who's now integrating into the United States and their contrary views of their parents, all of these factors play in to a child that we meet as we try to figure out the dynamic that they're living in.
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. So it goes to also, right, some families believe that youth that believe or identify as transgender, it's a mental illness, whereas it's that's their cultural belief around it, whereas other cultures say, no, that's just who they are and what they want to do. And so when parents come to us, right, when we say, well, we want to sit down with you and talk to you about what's going on with your children so we can understand our client better, what their positions are is reflected directly from what their culture is. And sometimes they don't even recognize that. And we have to get to the root of what was their family life like growing up? Did they come in from another country? And who they are and how that's sort of changed over time.
And the children, for example, could be complaining about one of their parents being so strident about teaching education. And then when you finally interview that parent, you find out that they were born and raised in Mexico, relatively affluent, and that they got a very good education, probably better than a lot of people in the United States. And they have such a driving desire to translate their education to their child that they can almost be too strident, too critical in the teaching of their children. And then that dynamic is further influencing mother versus father, and an alienation pattern that starts to develop as they view that parent as being too rigid. And so trying to pull that apart can be quite a challenge.
A big challenge, and I don't mean to butt in here, but I'll just tell you about a case I had, and I still laugh about this, and the case is gone because my minors counsel grew up, and she's graduated from high school now, but I mentioned Bangladesh already one time, and when we were leaving court after the very last hearing, when mother was awarded custody, even further more so than I thought she should have. I think she was given sole custody on everything. And I thought Dad should have still had some input, but he was so really unkind. When we were leaving the San Bernardino court, he's outside yelling at me that I'm an evil woman, when I'm leaving. And it's just, I couldn't help but feel sorry for him because he didn't understand that his kids were people. And he really wanted them to be his kind of people. He didn't want them to enjoy being with their mom, and he was very clear about that. And he told the judge, I'm never paying her a penny because I'm living in the big house, and my kids should be in the big house with me. They shouldn't be in that little apartment with her. And it was just his point of view from his background. He didn't know any different. And it was, no matter how much I talked to them, and I went to both homes many times, he could not understand why, if he had the big house and he had the money, that his kids shouldn't have the benefit of having him be their parent, not mom, who was living in the little, really tiny apartment because I'm not giving her any money. So that's one case where culture really, really, really played a big part in the case. Do you have another one you can talk about culture?
Well, I'm going to jump to a religious issue and try not to mention the religion because, like you, this doesn't have to do with the specific religion. But this was one of the most complicated cases. So the parents marry, and they're of the same religion. And then the mother becomes alienated from that religion, and that's kind of spread to the children. And then mother starts to have real problems, and CPS needs to take the children away from her. And I had a child that so refused to go with the father because of his religion and her understanding of that religion from what mother had said, that they actually had to place her where they were placing some girls that were being sex trafficking, and just such an awful placement. I had to go over there almost every day because I was so worried, because she just was adamant for so long in not being willing to deal with that. So you really had to understand her, understand what it was that had been imparted to her, and then try to find a middle ground, like a placement with grandmother, which is what I did. And even though grandmother had somewhat the same religion, it started to water down so that she could gain perspective. So that was one extreme case where that played a big part.
I had a case like that, and I've talked about it in Minors Council before. And the child is grown up and has children of her own. But it got so bad in that case that when she'd go to get in Dad's car for a visit, mother and grandmother, maternal grandmother, would come out and scream, "Don't get in that car, he's the devil." And Dad finally got custody only because that child had to be 5150'd twice because of things that her mother and her grandmother would scream when she was going to see her dad. And again, I'm not blaming the religion, but I don't doubt the mother really believed what she was saying.
Exactly.
And sometimes we can't effectively convince a parent they're not right. I'm not trying to say I'm trying to change somebody's religion or change their beliefs or change their lifestyle or anything like that. But when it comes to the best interest of the child and having to be 5150'd because of that stress being put on the child, I think that's where culture and things like that come in, to where Minors Council has to get involved and make some really hard decisions. That child loved her mom and didn't not want to be with her mom, but she also physically and emotionally couldn't stand the stress of being with her mom.
Well, and I think one of the articles talks about I don't remember if it was Native American, it was something like Eskimo, where the court had to decide, is it okay to go with one parent or the other, where the population is more of that culture. And, one of the parents didn't like it, of course, right? Whatever parent they went with was not good enough. And so there was an appeal, and basically the appeals court said, although maybe the other place had more of that culture, there was enough access where that parent that we gave custody to had culture that we're not going to change this order. It's not reversible error. And so whether it's the courts or as Minors Council, it's a hard decision to make sometimes, because sometimes you have a child that's reverse of what Virginia's talking about. They're so embedded in their religion or they're so embedded in their culture, but it's not healthy for them. And not because that culture is not healthy, it's because it's the way it's sort of been, the way that the child has processed it in their head and what's come of it. And everyone, therapists, psychologists, their attorney, everyone says this is not good, but they're so resistant to leaving the parent who is strongly entrenched in their culture. So you have to also deal with your client who is, holding onto the proverbial rope saying, I'm not going to go. And how do you deal with that issue, right?
Exactly.
I have a case right now where a child refuses to read any version of the Bible except the one his mother says he can read. And there's only one version acceptable to her. And I'm a Christian, and it doesn't bother me to have my child read the Bible, but I mean, the extreme stance of some people about their religion and how it affects their kids is, it's really troubling. It's troubling to have to get involved with a parent's religious beliefs, and it's troubling, and I'm not challenging the parents' religious beliefs, trust me, but it's troubling to have to get involved when it really starts affecting the child.
Exactly.
Who can't really perform normally in school, doesn't feel comfortable with what dad feels would be a normal life, sports or anything like that. So sometimes, as Minors Council, we have a lot of educating to do, of ourselves. We have a lot to learn about each parent, and I do a lot of research on my, the background of my parents. And you really have to learn to work with people who have ideas that are so different than ours, and yet respect the fact that these people are this child's parent. And they have a right, a religious right to educate their children to a point. Now, interestingly, this mother has lost legal custody, and yet still believes she has the only right, to let this child read which version of the Bible. So there are strange things out there that they're not strange to them, but it's very difficult decision making for us.
It's very challenging because
Very.
and it doesn't always work. Like another example is that you've got one parent who's very strict about the ceremonies and how something is followed, and the children don't care for that rigidity. And it's hard. I mean, I've tried. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Is to sit down with a parent and say, because your child should be such a priority to you, are you able, without impacting your beliefs and what you want to do, give more space to having differences with your children in order to be able to prioritize your children and keep them together? And it's challenging. And I think you're right. I think sometimes it means reading a little bit about what they're so adamant about to see if there's a way that you can communicate better in terms of what you're trying to say. It's hard.
It is.
You want to talk about developmental stage?
Yes.
Okay.
So I was going to lead into that because here we have Mama. We had 4 kids within 4 years at our house, but they're all adults, and I'm a grandmother now, and so it's not great that I can talk about developmental stages, except what I've learned in minors council classes, which is significant. She's experiencing right now, so she's going to talk about some developmental stages and the child.
Yeah, so you know about me, I have birthed 5 children. I'm pregnant with my 6th, and I have 2 children that are bonus children. I don't particularly like the word stepchildren, although I know that's a legal term. I don't think of them as anything other than my children. So we have 7 at the house, and they range from 2 to 16 graduating high school. And they all are, as children, are very different. And interestingly, when you look at them culturally, you have the children that I've birthed and the children that I haven't, who are raised in completely different households. So my household is filled with children who are, and I have lovely children, so this is not meant to be negative, but they were raised in a world where they are quite entitled, right? They have a lot of things. They were never told there's no money for this, which was very different from the way I was raised. I was raised by very hardworking parents. I had 3 siblings, but my dad retired as a commanding officer of LAPD, but we were not raised with a silver spoon in our mouth. My 2 bonus children were raised by a dad he has done an amazing job with them, but they didn't have a ton of extras in their in terms of physical extras that they could have. They had plenty, trust me, but it wasn't extra. And so that has affected all of their developments differently. And it's been an interesting task to look at how that has changed since these children have come into my life in the last year, for them and for my other children as well. But when and I have, just so everyone is aware, I mean, unfortunately, within all those children, of those children, there's one that has had significant mental health problems of the 7. And so, and part of those, there was, in the last topic, there was a talk of comorbidity when we talked about eating disorders. One of them, unfortunately, has I can't really say past tense because it's always an ongoing battle, an eating disorder, depression, anxiety, comorbidity. And also, interestingly, Diana, has this transgender binary thing going on, right? And so, but what I know of children is that they're all at different cognitive stages. And so seeing the work I do, I know, and doing the work I do, and that should be, people should know my background for prior to becoming an attorney many years ago was teaching, and it was science. So I taught science, and so I had all these children. And what I know of children, because I've had children who would come to me as a teacher, and I'd pull them aside and talk to them about what's going on in their households. I know that when we talk about at the core of our job as minors counsel, it's to figure out, one, where are they at developmentally? Because you can have a child that can come to you at 16 and say, I want to live with X. Do you now? That does not mean that they are cognitively there, right? They might have a mental health illness. One parent they might perceive as more stern, more lax. How is all that playing in? And you really have to sort of ferret that out. You could have a child that comes to you at 12 and says, I want to live with parent X. And maybe cognitively, they are more adept at figuring out really that is good for them. But it takes really, because as we know, when we have all these children, there's usually involved therapists, there's been a 730, and we can go to all of those sources and figure out what is really going on. Because I think there's the idea that, as we know, parents become entrenched, right? So a parent comes to us and says, my 12-year-old definitively knows what they want, and this is where they want to live, and this is what's going on. And you talk to your client, right? And you say to your client, where do you want to live? What is going on? I can't guarantee that's what's going to happen, but let me just tell you, I have to tell the court what your position is, and then I'll tell the court what I believe is good for you. But let's have that conversation. You start to uncover, as to what Virginia is saying, they have started sometimes to parrot what parents have been telling them or saying around them. And people forget that children are very good, and I see this with my 2-year-old, right? Regurgitating information in a way that is not, a 2-year-old saying something is not helpful, it's out of context. But that also is true for even older children. My college student has said things, almost college student has said things to me, and her IQ is off the charts. She skipped a grade, and she truly is off the charts. I look at her and I say, really? Is that really what you're saying, right? So you can't assume that a child who comes to you who is maybe in a gifted class has the emotional capacity. You can't assume that a child who is special needs class doesn't have the intellectual capacity, because there's a wide range. And so we just have to very carefully do the best we can with identifying what does that mean. And we have also the range of autistic children who come to us, and you have to figure out, how do we deal with that? Because you can have autistic children that are only nonverbal for certain people.
Big range.
They're very verbal, but they can only talk about certain things. So when we talk about it, it would be good if, as minors counsel, if you really try and educate yourself on what it means developmentally. Because even, I think it's, and Diana would have to verify, is it still 25 that they're frontal? It's 26. Yeah. Where they're formed up here, right? They can make decisions that make sense, and they can put pieces together in an abstract way to make it concrete. Abstract pieces, put it together to make it concrete in a way that they can't when they're younger. So we have to walk carefully over the issues of what children tell us based on where they're at developmentally.
I had a case, and actually Diana was brought into it, where there were 3 little girls. One of them had a bad experience while at Dad's house visiting one summer. And when the 3 children were interviewed, it's really interesting. The oldest one was, about 16? And the youngest one was maybe 5 or 6. 5. The words that came out of the little one's mouth were almost identical to the words that came out of the older sister's mouth. And you could not change her thought process no matter what. And it's may not have even been the mother who was doing the influencing, on those 3 girls. It might have been the older daughter. I don't think we ever really...
I think it was the older daughter.
Yeah, I think we all figured it was the older daughter, but I don't think we ever got to the point where we were able to change those 3 kids to the point where they wouldn't have made their dad's life a living hell had they gone with him, because they were so adamantly, I don't even want to use the word hateful toward him, but they were mean.
But I have another case I'm just working on now, a little different angle, but the same approach. Somebody that's on the autistic scale, and probably to some degree influenced by his history, and you could have an alienating factor. But the bottom line is, there's that autistic child who's really, really reacting badly to one parent, and you can feel it viscerally. You can feel the pain, and you can watch the 2 brothers together and see the difference. And so it's becoming more and more of my goal to sit with the parents together without making judgments on it. And even if it's unfair that the child feels a lot of pain with regard to one of the parents, that also makes it difficult for that parent to manage that child. So you start trying to see if they can come up with something in between. And like you said, no matter what you think about the accuracy of what a child is experiencing, sometimes you just simply have to come up with a recommendation that accepts that, because changing it is not in the realistic future.
Right.
And yet I've got that case I was telling you about where mother really doesn't know the current father. You know, she hasn't known him for maybe 11 years. And so I'm actually flying with the child to spend a day with dad at his house. And then it's my intent to put mom and dad here in my office and just ask them to introduce themselves to the other parent.
Good luck.
Really? No,
I said,
no,
it's going good luck.
I really mean this.
I know.
I think it's
And
It is a good idea.
let each parent ask questions of the other parent, and let each parent know as much as they can about the child, but let the other parent know as much as they can about themselves. Because right now we have two parents who don't have a clue about the other. They don't know anything about each other, and all they're doing is in court, you know, spearing the other parent when
With
it has
words.
nothing to do with what's going on at all.
Well, and sometimes the parents think that they know where the child is at.
Of
That they know,
course.
I know the child better than you know the child. And the reality is, you find out neither of them know the child.
Yeah.
You know?
And so that, you know what I did, I put the parents in the same. I've been doing this lately. This is not all fun, but I put the two parents in the same room with me. But in my situation, because they didn't know each other, I made them tell each other what they saw about the child when the child was with them. And I made them listen to each other in terms of, and they started sharing information. And,
That's awesome.
well, it's important. It's really important.
Some of the times, and this I think touches on Diana's point about this everyone being in the computer, right, since COVID, that sometimes what happens is you have children who come to you and one parent relays that the child is very antisocial, but they have open access to the computer at that parent's house. And the other parent says, I don't have that problem. They eat dinner with us. So that comes into their culture, right? Because culturally in some families, even if they were once married, it's very different. At dinner time, we all sit down together, we eat together, we talk together after school. And in some families, it's a free-for-all. Go do your thing. And so you have to have those conversations too with, you know, your clients as the children about, you know, I understand at mom's house is this way or dad's house is this way, but how about for an hour at mom's house you're not on the computer? Or, you know, let's try that. Let's see how that works. See if you like your mom a little bit better, your dad a little bit better. You know, and they roll their eyes and do what children do, right?
No, and you know, again, going back to culture, it's hard because we're talking about developmental stages of kids a little bit. And I was appointed on a case where my kids were now beautiful teenage girls. And I mean, they looked like they could have been models. And the court was trying to reunify them with their dad. And they had very distant memories of their dad, but they had distinct memories of their paternal grandmother. They love her greatly because she's always stayed there for them. She's very, very, very from the old Hispanic culture. Walking 1898 Hispanic culture. I loved her. She was a lovely lady. But when Dad insisted that these girls come and spend weekends with him, where did he expect them to sleep? On a mattress on the floor. Could have been in the living room. It could have been, you know, I can't remember. It wasn't in a private room. I know that. And he got so upset with them because they didn't want to do that. They didn't feel comfortable. You know, I cannot criticize the dad. I cannot criticize the girls. But the parents blamed each other. it's mother's problem because she's too highfalutin, and it's dad's problem because he refuses to get these girls to bed. But you know what? They chose to have these kids together, and those two parents never, no matter what I did, would talk to each other, be in the same room with each other, would not meet with each other. The mother actually got a move-away order that I was not in favor of, but she had custody for so long that she got the move-away order, and one of the girls called me later and said, I'm thinking of killing myself because I don't want to be in Los Angeles. And,
But have you also noticed that what happens is you're trying to get the children to have communication, and even if the parent is talking to the child, they're really trying to talk to the other parent. And so they're not really, like you said, they're not seeing their girls and where they should sleep. They're indirectly talking to each other and fighting with each other.
Of course.
And so those children are not really being totally perceived. And the actual situation that they find themselves in appreciated without blame.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
In that particular case, I had the dad come in and meet with each girl individually in my office, and I should have had a therapist here, but I didn't. I should have. So that the girls could have a one-on-one talk with their dad. And the one, I can't remember if it's the older or the younger, they're only a year apart, said to her dad, I'm so disappointed in you because you never come to my school activities. You never do this and you never do that, and I haven't heard from you for at least 3 Christmases. And instead of bending over and saying to her, I love you, I'm so sorry, he just got so furious
Yep.
that he refused to see her anymore.
Yeah.
And I felt a lot of guilt for that because I didn't have a therapist here, to see what I could have done differently.
How was she, a preteen or a teenager?
No,
at that
they're
point?
teenagers.
Oh,
They were
teenagers at that
probably 15 and 16 at the time. And the girls were not happy. They had their issues, and they really wanted that connection with their dad, and they really wanted to tell him, we need you in our lives. But they couldn't make that bridge no matter what they tried. They started off by saying, I love you, and I'm so disappointed because.
Which we sometimes forget the developmental stage that our parents are at too, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I know people, it is kind of
That's
funny,
true.
but our parents who are, doesn't matter their ages,
true.
sometimes you stop for a minute and you think, wow, they really just acted like a 16-year-old just then. And it's that emotional gut reaction that we have to really be cognizant of as well.
We're always concerned about running over on time because we never know when to cut it off.
I wanted to say one thing, just one more angle. Sometimes your own cultural biases start to interfere in the judgment you're trying to make about a minor child. Absolutely. And my particular experience was, it became obvious to me that this particular girl wanted to spend the time with her dad, and for whatever reason had an alienation with her mother at that time. And you sometimes have to take those middle school and high school people and put them where they're happiest so that they perform. So I went over to look at Father's house, and there must have been about 8 people living there, with 2 bedrooms. But it was immaculate. It was organized. She was happy. And they had a child sleeping. So it wasn't a dirt situation.
I think that was my case.
I don't know. But
You were minors counsel.
I don't know. But I had to talk to myself and say, overall, this girl is doing better. She's happy here. And the woman who ran the house was very, very nice and rather typically Mexican. And sometimes you have to just say, this may not be a way that I'm used to living, but they're happy and it's clean, and it just can't be an issue for me.
And I agree. We've taught as minors counsel, we've taught and taken classes on, bias and, pardon? Yeah,
Yes.
stereotypes and bias. And we've done it year after year after year. And, every year I learn something. And we've actually taught it. A bunch of us got together and taught it at my church. And we live streamed it to the United States. And it was really an interesting response because I belong to, I don't want to say conservative church, but probably more conservative than other churches, but not as conservative as many. And, I got feedback like, I really learned a lot from that. We talked about, stereotypes and that kind of thing. But I want to move from there because you talked about that. And I mean, it's extremely, extremely important that Minors Council is extremely educated on bias and stereotypes because every parent has some kind of a stereotype or a bias that they're living with or seeing through. And we have to be able to recognize that as well as our own biases. But I wanted to move on from something that Lauren touched on, and that's when we have a case where the parent is not at a good developmental stage. And, I have a couple of cases where one of the parents is either an alcoholic or mentally ill. And it's kind of why I asked Tammy today if somebody's been through a couple of 730 evaluations, does CCRC go back and look at that? Well, they didn't. And they recommended that a teenager get to go live with mother who's a really severe alcoholic. And she's there now taking care of her mother because her mother needs a caretaker. And she shouldn't be there. But, from what she told us today, and we talked a little bit about CCRC, we had Tammy Chesworth come in and talk to us about how they only get 15 minutes with the file before they have a meeting with parents, so they really don't get to go back and look at the history of the case. In this case, they really should have. And I have this rambling complaint that our judicial officers don't know the things we're learning, especially like CCRC mediators only have 15 minutes with a file, before making a recommendation to the court. Although we all were told that they do go look at other things like, is there any DV or anything like that? But there's still so much that can be missed if you don't go back and look at 730 evaluation reports, etc. I had a case when I was appointed to Minors Council out of Riverside, and I went back and I looked at a 730 evaluation that had been done 10 years before. Nobody in the court case had looked at that report after it came in. And it said very distinctly, this father has a personality disorder. He cannot have custody of these children.
Which rarely they say, which is shocking when it says
I know. And he had been awarded joint custody. And I've talked about this case in the past. This is a case where he was sexting his pictures to his daughter. And she was getting all these really gross pictures of her father. Mother was quite conservative religion. And I was brought in. Nobody knew about these pictures coming to the daughter until she told me. And she said, it's gross. I don't want these pictures of my dad, and I don't want to see this stuff he's leaving all around his condominium when he has different girls coming over every weekend, and here's what I see. And it was gross. And when I took my report to the court and I said, here's a 730 evaluation from 10 years ago, and it said 10 years ago, this man has a severe personality disorder. He cannot have custody of these children. It had never been considered by the court. And I've stayed in touch with this family. I've stayed in touch with the kids. Of course, they're young adults now. And I got a call from the dad maybe a year and a half ago. You are the reason I'm not seeing my children. And I hadn't been on the case for
That goes along with a personality disorder, though,
doesn't it? I have not been on that case for maybe 7 years, 8 years. But, we also have to recognize, and I do not diagnose. I need to make it really, really clear. I don't diagnose.
Absolutely.
But I have read, all the books we've been recommended to read, emotional vampires. I've read other books which, you know, a light just clicks on when you recognize, you know, things that are written in that book. And I mean, you can't help but recognize schizophrenia or paranoia or narcissism. I can't help but recognize it. I don't diagnose personality disorder or bipolar disorder, but it's like I'll text it to Amy Miller or to Debbie or to, you know, Diana. I've got this, and this, and this, and this. Well, I'd need to see them. That's what Diana always says.
Just use my emotional vampire.
Yeah. But, you know, as minors counsel, it's so very, very, very important to get all of that extra training about what it is we need to recognize, because we cannot fail to listen to these kids who say, this, I had a call yesterday. And I actually put a call into Kim Phillips at the request of this child because the family had been seeing Kim Phillips. I actually called Kim and I talked to her and I called my child back. And my child is now in high school. I haven't seen her for more than 5 years. The court took the kids away from mom because she was alcoholic and she was screaming and off the charts, and she wouldn't stop smoking pot, and all kinds of stuff was going on in her house. It was crazy. She's 15 or 16 now, and her dad brought her in the other day, and she said, I need to talk to you because I said, are things okay? No. Well, her brother is now a Marine, and they brought me his picture. He just went through boot camp and graduated the other day, but she said, now I need to talk to you. Okay? I don't want to be taken away from my mom. I made my dad send me back there after the court took me away from her because she needs me. What's going on? She's drinking really badly again, and when we drive down the freeway, she's trying to open the door and jump out to kill herself, and if I'm not there, something bad's going to happen to her. I want you to call. I said, why don't you let me put a call into Miss Phillips and I'll get back to you with some information. I said, my opinion, if you don't want to not be in your mom's custody, is you need to get everybody in the family together for an intervention, and you don't need to do it. You're the kid. This is not your job. But that's what needs to happen. Your mother needs to go into rehab. And, you know, she said, well, she's never going to do that. But she said, my stepdad and my dad are now talking. And that's a good thing because the mother is so out there again. And I talked to Kim Phillips, and she said, you call your girl back and you tell her she is not that mother's mother. She cannot fix her mother. It is not her job to fix her mother. It's okay to be involved in an intervention, but she's got to expect a lot of screaming and crying and carrying on. And if she can't deal with that from her mother, she's going to have to learn to ignore it. I thought, that's interesting. Because she says her mother throws temper tantrums all the time. Screams and rants and raves. Nobody listens to me. Nobody cares what I think. And then everybody goes and says, I love you. I'm sorry. You know, and Kim said to me, your child, and she remembers the family, you need to tell her she's got to ignore that behavior. She cannot fix her mother. She's got to stop working and what's the word I'm looking for? Codependent.
Because she's
codependent.
She's been parentified too, right? So
No.
Hasn't?
Yes, she is. And I said that to Kim. She's parenting her mother. But you've got to tell her that she's codependent with her mother, and she can no longer continue like that. So I called her back, and she listened, and she said, well, that's really interesting. I'm going to try that. You know, she's way too old for her age. But she doesn't want to leave her mom because she wants to be with her mom part of the time. You know, she's there week on, week off or something. But she does not want to leave her mom because she's so afraid of what her mom's going to do to herself.
Well, that's not unusual, I think, especially for older girls to feel like they've got to save their parents. And one thing I talk to them about, which I've found is also a cultural phenomenon, is there's certain types of cultures where they tend to all get in the same canoe. And if one person's in trouble, there's 10 of them in the canoe. And so what I try to tell those children is you are not going to help your mother ultimately if you drown. That's not going to be the ultimate help, because you get in, then you're in the boat, then it's heavier, it's sinking, and you're sinking too.
That's great for a kid,
But trying to explain it to them that way, because I think it's also I see it more in Hispanic families, and I'm constantly kidding my assistant. Okay, how many people are in your canoe today? Because they're all trying to help each other.
Well, does anybody have anything they want to say before we wrap up here?
Everyone's looking at me. What's happening?
You're in the middle.
In the mush pot.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think my final thought is just sort of that it's a tough job, right? That we have, and we won't always get it right. But if we keep our ears open and we recognize that there are all these psychological pieces, and like you said, you reach out to the professionals, we'll be okay. We'll get to as close to the right answer as we can, and it may not be the right answer for all parties, obviously, because someone's going to be unhappy, but it'll probably be the right answer for our clients.
We hope.
We hope.
We hope, and that's our goal.
It is, absolutely.
Thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank
we really
you.
appreciate it.